What if the woman you rescued on the side of the road turned out to be one of the richest people in the country? He gave her his last blanket, cooked for her on a broken stove, slept on the floor while she took his only couch. He had no idea she was a billionaire in hiding. But what happened next didn't just change her life, it changed his forever. Keep watching, because when the truth comes out, love will be tested in the most extraordinary way. The rain came down in heavy sheets, blurring the headlights of Ethan's rusted pickup as he drove along the winding country road, wipers screeching back and forth like they were pleading for mercy. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when even the crickets give up, and Ethan was just trying to make it home before the roads flooded again. That's when he saw it. Hazard lights flickering weakly through the storm, a black car angled sideways in the muddy ditch, steam rising from the hood. He slowed without thinking, pulled to the side, and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit him hard, biting through his flannel jacket as he squinted through the rain. Inside the car was a woman, soaked, pale, clutching the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her window rolled down just enough for her voice to break through the downpour. "I don't have cell service. I've been here over an hour." Her hands were trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Ethan nodded once, calm, steady. "You're lucky I came this way. Come on, I'll help push. You don't have to." "It's all right," he said, already moving toward the bumper, boots sinking into the mud. The tires spun uselessly, but he pushed harder, rain soaking through every layer, until the car rocked free with a groan and rolled halfway back onto the gravel shoulder. She opened the door and stepped out, heels sinking immediately, her coat clinging to her like paper. "You're soaked," he said. "So are you," she replied, almost defiantly. He chuckled once. "Fair enough. My place isn't far. You can dry off, get warm. It's not much, but it's safe." She hesitated. Her eyes darted past him, as if searching for a hidden motive, but there was only exhaustion and sincerity in his face. "Okay," she said finally, "just until the storm passes." As she climbed into the passenger seat of his old truck, the silence between them was loud, but not uncomfortable. He offered her the only dry towel he had. She took it, eyes flickering to the patched seats, the dashboard held together with tape. She expected judgment in his voice. Questions? There were none. Just the low hum of the engine, the rhythm of the rain, and a man who didn't ask for her name, only that she was all right. The truck rattled down the gravel road toward the hills, headlights casting broken shadows through the trees as the rain softened into a steady mist, the storm losing its fury, but not its weight. The woman sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, soaked clothes clinging to her skin, but she said nothing. Ethan glanced over once, then reached behind his seat and pulled out an old flannel blanket. Faded, worn, but clean. "Here," he said gently. "This one's warmer than it looks." She took it slowly, hesitating before draping it across her lap. "Thank you, of course," he replied, his hands steady on the wheel, eyes never leaving the road. They passed no houses, no lights, just forest and fog and the distant hum of thunder. After 20 minutes, they pulled into a clearing where a small cabin leaned quietly into the earth, its porch light flickering like it hadn't been touched in years. "It's not fancy," Ethan muttered, shutting off the engine, "but the roof holds." He opened her door and led her up the steps, unlocking the door with a key that had clearly been used 1,000 times. Inside was modest, and a wood stove, one sofa, a single lamp, boots by the wall, the faint scent of firewood and rain. She stood in the doorway, unsure, dripping onto the floorboards. "You can take the couch," he said, pulling out a clean towel and handing it to her. "Bathroom's through there." "I'll heat up some soup," she blinked. "You don't even know my name." He smiled. "Doesn't change the weather." She disappeared into the bathroom. He didn't follow. He didn't linger. He just stirred the pot of soup on the old stove and set 2 chipped bowls on the table. When she returned, her wet clothes hung in the hallway, and she wore a flannel shirt several sizes too big. "I'll give it back," she said. "You don't have to." They ate in silence at first, the warmth slowly sinking into their bones. She watched him. How he chewed quietly. How he didn't fill silence with empty words. How he didn't try to impress her. He asked no questions, made no assumptions, just refilled her bowl when it was empty and placed a folded blanket on the couch. "You sleep here," she said suddenly. "You shouldn't give up your bed." He shook his head. "I've slept on that couch more than the bed. Habit." She stared at him, confused. "Why are you being so kind?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because maybe tonight you needed someone to be." Then he turned off the light, stepped into the other room, and left her alone, with a blanket, a bowl of soup, and a silence that felt more like safety than loneliness. The morning came slow, gray, and heavy, with clouds still clinging to the trees and the air thick with leftover rain. Ethan was already outside, splitting wood with a steady rhythm, his shirt damp with effort and mist. Inside, Isabella watched him through the window, the flannel shirt still draped over her shoulders, a hot mug in her hands, her eyes quiet. She'd slept deeper than she had in weeks. No alarms, no security cameras, no concrete walls, just creaking floorboards and the sound of a stranger breathing softly in the next room. "You ready?" Ethan asked when she stepped out, hair pulled back, clothes dry but wrinkled. "There's a guy in town who might be able to fix your car. We'll walk. It's not far." She nodded, pulling on the boots he'd offered her, 2 sizes too big. They started down the muddy trail, side by side, not speaking much, but not needing to. As they reached the edge of town, heads turned, people stared. Long, deliberate stares. A group of men on the corner nudged each other, whispering. One laughed. A woman behind the counter at the general store narrowed her eyes. "She's with him." The mechanic barely looked up when Ethan asked for help. "Can't get to it today. Maybe next week. It's an emergency," Ethan said. She was stranded. The man wiped his hands and shrugged. "Not my fault she took the wrong road." Isabella opened her mouth, but Ethan gently touched her arm. "It's all right," he said softly, guiding her out before the argument escalated. "What was that?" she asked once they were out of earshot. "They don't even know me. Small town," Ethan said, shrugging. "People like to decide who's worth helping." At the diner, it got worse. The waitress looked her up and down, nose wrinkled. "She smells like your truck. Or is that just her?" Someone at the counter joked. When Isabella asked for tea, the waitress sneered. "We serve real drinks here, sweetheart." Ethan stood, jaw tight. "We'll go." "Yeah, you do that," the cook muttered from the back. "Charity case, like you bringing in strays." Now Isabella's face burned, not with shame, but with rage. But Ethan didn't lash out, didn't raise his voice, just held the door open for her and walked them back into the street like a gentleman in another century. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, trembling. "Why didn't you fight back?" He stopped walking, looked at her. "Because if I fought back every time someone called me less, I wouldn't have time left to live." She stared at him, speechless, as a slow realization wrapped around her heart. He hadn't just been living with less. He'd been living with grace in a world that gave him every reason to lose it. That night, the woods whispered through the cabin walls, wind curling between the trees like it was searching for something lost. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting flickers of gold across Ethan's face as he dozed lightly in the chair, boots near the stove, a half-finished book resting on his chest. In the quiet, Isabella stood by the window, wrapped in his flannel shirt, arms crossed tight. But not from cold. Her eyes stared out into the dark, expression unreadable. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the old landline on the kitchen counter, lifted the receiver, and dialed a number from memory. 3 rings. Then a clipped voice answered Langford Security. She didn't hesitate. "This is Isabella. Code word, Sparrow Glass." On the other end, silence was shattered. "Miss Langford, where are you? We've been searching." "I'm fine," she cut in. "I need a full background on a man named Ethan Cole. Lives alone, no immediate family. Keep it quiet, no contact. Understood. Are you in danger?" "No." she whispered, eyes flicking back toward Ethan's sleeping frame. "But I think I just met the only honest person I've seen in 10 years. Her voice cracked, just slightly, and she hung up before they could respond. She leaned back against the counter, pressing her palm to her face, breathing slowly, shakily. The storm, the car, the mud. It hadn't been planned. She'd left the city days ago after walking out of a board meeting, disgusted by the masks, the lies, the shallow people who smiled while stabbing each other in the back. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, hadn't intended to disappear, but when her car broke down in the middle of nowhere, and this man appeared with no phone, no pretense, no agenda, she stayed, not out of necessity, out of curiosity. She moved to the fireplace, picked up the book Ethan had dropped. A handwritten note on the inside cover read, "For whoever needs a quiet place to feel human again." She traced the words slowly, a lump forming in her throat. Behind her, Ethan stirred. "Everything okay?" he murmured, half asleep. She turned quickly, nodding. "Yeah, sorry, I couldn't sleep." He smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." She hesitated, then sat down across from him. For a moment, they just watched the flames, the silence between them no longer cold, but intimate, heavy, full of something unspoken. He glanced at her, his voice soft. "You've got that look, like someone with 1,000 things to say and no one to trust with any of it." She blinked, stunned. "How did you—" He shrugged. "I've worn it too." She looked down, clenched her hands in her lap, and said nothing, because the truth was, for the first time in years, someone had seen straight through her, and hadn't asked for anything in return. The morning sun broke through the clouds in narrow shafts of gold, dappling the forest floor with light. Birds chirped softly from the trees, and the cabin, still and warm, seemed to exhale with relief. Ethan stepped outside with a mug of black coffee in one hand, a rusted toolbox in the other, and began checking the patchwork shingles on his porch roof. Inside, Isabella watched him through the window, her heart heavier than she could explain. She'd stayed longer than intended. One night turned into two turned into 4, but the longer she remained, the more her walls began to splinter. Her assistant had called again. We found him. Ethan Cole, grew up in Tennessee. Former auto shop worker, lost his parents' young age, never married, turned down multiple job offers in the city, lives off odd repairs and seasonal work, no debts, no criminal record, low income, generous to a fault. Isabella had listened quietly. "Keep monitoring," she said, "but stay invisible." Later that day, she followed Ethan into town again, this time voluntarily. They walked the dirt path together, and she noticed how everyone seemed to glance at him. Not with hatred now, but with confusion. Respect, maybe. Curiosity, definitely. They passed an elderly man struggling to lift a bag of dog food into his pickup. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Need a hand, Mr. Lowell?" Without waiting for an answer, he lifted it with ease and placed it gently into the truck bed. "Back still giving you trouble every day since '86. The man chuckled. "You're a good one, son." Ethan just tipped his hat. "Just doing what I can." Next, they stopped at the tiny food pantry near the edge of town. Ethan stepped inside and donated 2 cans of soup and a box of tea. Isabella stared, stunned. "You're giving away food," he shrugged. "I had extras. You barely have enough yourself. Someone else has less." She didn't know what to say. That afternoon, she found him in the backyard fixing an old neighbor's bike. A child waited nearby, watching with wide eyes as Ethan adjusted the bent wheel and tested the brake pads. "Free of charge," he said. "Just bring it back if it starts squeaking." The boy nodded. "Thanks." Mr. Isabella sat on the porch, legs pulled up under her, watching every small act like they were chapter in a book she never knew existed. No cameras, no stage, just a man who did good because it was right. That night, as they sat under the stars, she turned to him suddenly. "Do you always help people?" He didn't look at her. "When I can?" "Even when it costs you something?" "Especially then," he said. "That's when it counts." She looked down at her hands. her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think men like you existed anymore." Ethan turned to her, meeting her gaze in the dark. Maybe they just stopped being loud about it. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't just hiding who she was. She was being shown who she could become. The morning light spilled across the wooden floor of the cabin, quiet and unassuming, like everything else Ethan touched. Isabella stood by the kitchen table, staring at the envelope she had placed there with trembling hands. It is thick with cash, a soft thank you scribbled on the note inside, her name unsigned. It felt hollow and heavy all at once. She didn't want to insult him, didn't want to pity him, but part of her, a part trained by boardrooms and bodyguards, believed money was still the only language people understood. So she left it there, quietly, and stepped out onto the porch, forcing herself to breathe as the mist clung to the treetops like ghosts that hadn't yet let go. Inside, Ethan entered moments later, wiping sweat from his brow after chopping wood. His flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, boots leaving a trail of forest behind him. He saw the envelope immediately. He didn't rush to open it. He just stared at it for a long moment, then peeled it open with quiet fingers. His jaw didn't clench, his eyes didn't widen. He just sighed, deep and slow, like someone who had been handed the wrong gift at the end of a long road. He stepped outside, envelope in hand, and stood on the porch beside her. She turned quickly. He held it up, not accusingly, but with an ache in his voice that struck deeper than any rejection. "I can't take this." Her voice came out too sharp. "Why not?" He looked at her the way a man does when he sees a good soul hiding behind broken armor. "Because I helped you, because you needed help. That was enough. I don't need to be paid for being human." She swallowed, the words catching like gravel in her throat. "But you need it. You live with less than anyone I've ever met. And still," he said softly, "I sleep better than most of the men you probably know." Her eyes stung. "Is that pride?" "No," he replied, stepping closer. "That's peace." She looked down, ashamed, humiliated. Not by him, but by herself. "No one's ever said no to me," she whispered. "Then maybe they never saw you." He said, "Not really." That night, she sat alone under the stars, barefoot in the grass, his flannel wrapped around her like borrowed safety. And when Ethan came to join her, she didn't say for word. She didn't need promises. She only asked him the one question that had haunted her since the night they met. "Why are you like this?" And he answered without hesitation, without bravado, without armor. "Because someday, I want to be the kind of man I'd trust with my daughter, if I ever had one." She turned toward him then, everything inside her unsteady. Because in that moment, she realized what no wealth had ever given her, a man who couldn't be bought, because his worth was already priceless. The days slowed down after that. Sunlight stretched longer through the trees, mornings felt softer, and even the silences between them began to hum with something unspoken. Isabella stayed, not because she had to, but because she couldn't bring herself to leave. Every morning, Ethan brewed 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted one. Every afternoon, they walked the trail to town just to say hello to the world. And every evening, they sat on the porch without music, without phones, just the symphony of crickets and creaking wood. It was the kind of life that didn't ask anything from her except to be present, and that, more than anything, terrified her. One afternoon, she joined him by the shed while he mended a fence post. He handed her a rusted hammer and smiled. "Want to learn?" She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And an hour later, her palms were blistered, her braid was undone, and her laugh echoed through the clearing like it had been trapped inside her for years. That night, she cooked dinner for the first time in ages. Nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread. But the way Ethan looked at her when she carried the plates made her stomach twist. "You sure you've never done this before?" he teased. "Don't mock the cook," she said, grinning, but her hands trembled as she set down his glass. After dinner, they sat on the porch, closer now, shoulders brushing, stars blooming overhead like slow explosions. She turned to him, her voice barely above a breath. "Do you ever wonder if you're meant for more?" He looked at her, and the firelight danced in his eyes. I used to, then I realized, maybe more isn't louder or richer. Maybe it's just deeper, quieter. Her heart thudded. You're not what I expected. Neither are you, he said, and then the world paused. Not because anything grand happened, but because it almost did. He leaned in slightly, like instinct, like gravity. She didn't move, but just before their lips could meet, she pulled back, eyes wide, breath shaky. I can't, she whispered. I'm not who you think I am. He didn't flinch. Then tell me. But she stood, arms wrapped around herself, eyes clouded with fear. Not yet. And she walked inside, leaving him on the porch with the stars and the ache of something beautiful. Interrupted. Inside, behind the closed door, she pressed her back against the wall and let the tears fall. Because for the first time in years, her heart wanted to be known, but didn't know if it was safe to be loved. The sky cracked open in the late afternoon, rain pouring in thick sheets as if the heavens were trying to drown out every secret she hadn't yet spoken. Isabella stood by the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching Ethan hammer the shed door back into place. Unaware that everything between them was seconds from collapsing, she wanted to freeze time, hold it still in that quiet moment where he still looked at her like she was just a woman. Just Isabel. But the sound of tires crunching wet gravel broke the illusion. She turned sharply as a black SUV rolled into the clearing, sleek, foreign, and out of place in the mud-soaked woods. The driver stayed seated, but the passenger door opened fast, and out stepped her assistant, Clara, trench coat billowing, umbrella snapping against the wind. Ms. Langford, she called out, voice urgent, professional, and sharp. We need to go. Now. Ethan had paused mid-swing, hammer still in hand, eyes narrowing as he stepped out from under the eaves. The rain hit hard, soaking through his shirt, but his focus was locked on the woman in the trench coat and then, slowly, with dawning clarity, on Isabella, Clara continued, lowering her voice but not enough. The board is calling an emergency session. The media is circling. You've been gone too long. If you don't return now, they'll strip your authority. They're already talking succession. Ethan took a slow step forward. Bored, Isabella turned, lips parting to stop the damage. But it was too late. Clara looked directly at Ethan now, hesitant but firm. You must be Ethan. I assume you understand by now? Oh, Ms. Isabella Langford is not just anyone. She's the principal shareholder of Langford Technologies and the Langford Foundation. She disappeared. You're the reason. Silence. Ethan looked at Isabella like he didn't recognize her anymore. Langford, he said softly. That's who you are? I was going to tell you, she whispered, eyes glistening, throat tight. He stepped back as if her words had weight. You let me believe you were stranded, lost. You slept under my roof, ate my food, let me give you everything I didn't have. And the whole time, you were testing me. No, she choked. At first, yes, but then I saw you. I felt you, and suddenly none of it mattered. I didn't want to be her anymore. I just wanted to be someone you could look at and not see dollar signs. His face didn't twist with anger. It broke, quietly, heartbreakingly. You should have told me, before you let me care. I didn't know how. She said, I was scared you'd look at me differently. I would have, he said, not because you're rich, but because you didn't trust me with the truth. And then he turned, walking past her, past Clara, past the SUV, disappearing into the cabin without a word, the door closing behind him with a dull, echoing click, not a slam, not rage, just final. Isabella stood there in the downpour, mascara bleeding, chest heaving, her life waiting in the car behind her, but her heart trapped in the wooden house where the only man who'd ever seen her didn't want to anymore. The cabin was empty. Days had passed since the storm, since the SUV disappeared into the trees carrying Isabella back to a world lined with glass towers and cold conference rooms, and Ethan hadn't spoken a word to anyone. The porch sat still, the tools untouched, her borrowed flannel folded neatly on the back of the chair where she used to sit watching the birds. In town, Whispers bloomed like weeds. She was a billionaire. He had no idea. He let her go. But Ethan didn't explain. He just worked, repaired, fixed the fence for Mrs. Landry without charging, repainted the community church's back wall, delivered firewood to the same neighbors who used to mock him, not out of pride, not out of distraction, but because the silence she left behind was too heavy to carry if he stood still. In the city, Isabella sat at the head of a long boardroom table, surrounded by men who blinked too much and smiled too little. She signed the paperwork, nodded at the strategy decks, and listened to voices pitching damage control like she was a brand, not a person. But inside her desk drawer was a photo. A grainy Polaroid Ethan had taken of her, laughing in the garden, dirt on her nose, holding a carrot like it was a trophy. She stared at it every night like it was the only thing keeping her grounded in a world that never really knew her. One morning, after a sleepless night and a speech she didn't remember giving, Isabella stood in front of a mirror and whispered to her reflection, "Enough." She didn't take the car. She didn't bring security. She didn't pack. She just left. And hours later, as the wind kicked up soft flurries over the gravel path, she stepped back into the clearing where everything real had started. The cabin stood just as she'd left it. Humble, weathered, quietly waiting. Ethan was there, behind the shed, hammer in hand, fixing a piece of siding. He turned when he heard footsteps, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other. No words, no titles, just breathe. "I didn't come back for forgiveness," she said finally. "I came back because every version of my life, without you in it, felt hollow." He didn't move. "I was scared," she continued, "not of losing you, but of being loved for the one part of me I didn't build. My name, my money, my mask. You made me feel like I could exist without all of it, and that terrified me more than anything." He set the hammer down gently. "Why now? Because I'd rather be rejected by the one man who saw me than applauded by 1,000 who never did." He took a step closer, slow, cautious. "And who are you now?" She looked up at him, voice trembling. "I don't know, but I want to find out with you." He studied her, and then, without warning, pulled her into a slow, aching kiss. Quiet, sure, filled with every word neither of them could say. And when they broke apart, he didn't ask what she brought or what she left behind. He just said, "You hungry?" And she laughed. Real, messy, bright, starving, and just like that. The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. The chapel wasn't grand. It sat at the edge of the forest, tucked between whispering trees and wildflowers that had learned to bloom without permission. The pews were handmade, the windows clouded with age, and the bell above the doorway didn't ring like glass. It rang like memory, but it was perfect, because it was real. Ethan stood at the front in a simple suit, hands folded, boots polished the best they could be, his eyes fixed on the wooden doors as if everything he'd ever lost would walk through them. And then, she did. Isabella stepped into the chapel, not as a Langford, not as a billionaire, not as an heiress wrapped in silk and spectacle, but as a woman in love. Her dress was soft ivory, no diamonds, no veil, just a small bouquet of wildflowers Ethan had picked himself that morning. Her eyes locked with his, and everything else fell away. The titles, the noise, the history, only this remained. The guests were few. Mrs. Landry is in the front row. Eli from the hardware store. The little boy whose bike Ethan had fixed, sitting beside his mom. Clara, too, standing quietly in the back, smiling with mist in her eyes. Not as an assistant, but as a friend. There were no press cameras, no media leaks, just the raw, quiet kind of joy that doesn't need witnesses to matter. When the vows came, Ethan didn't read from a card. He just held her hands and said, "I thought I had nothing, but then you showed up like a storm, and somehow left me with more than I ever knew I deserved." Isabella's voice trembled as she replied, "You loved me when I had nothing to offer but secrets. You gave me a home when I didn't even know I was searching for one. And today, I give you everything. And boom, with no mask, no fortune, no name, just me. The crowd stood as they kissed, slow and certain, like a promise sealed not by words, but by everything they had endured to find this moment. Outside, the sun cut through the trees like a blessing, and when they walked out the chapel doors, hand in hand, husband and wife, it wasn't under a shower of rose petals or gold. It was under the sound of the wind moving through the pine, of boots on gravel, of two lives, once broken, walking forward as one. He didn't have a fortune. He didn't wear a suit. He had no mansion, no name, no need to impress. But what he gave her, no money could ever buy. She arrived lost, afraid to be seen. She left with a husband who saw her before the world ever did. If this story moved you, share it. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with riches, but with kindness, honesty, and a couch in a quiet cabin. And someone you know might still be waiting for their miracle on a rainy road.